Welcome to this episode of Solved, plucked from deep in our archives. You may not realize we've actually been doing this show since way before it was called Solved and started being posted to YouTube, so this is good stuff. I also wanted to let you know that we're temporarily slowing down the pace of production for new episodes of Solved while we reorganize our processes here on the back end to get ourselves on better footing so that we can come back stronger than ever. You can help support us in this process as we hire additional help by becoming a member. Members get an extended version of Solved before YouTube, as well as ad-free versions of the Best of Left podcast available wherever you get your podcasts. So sign up at bestofleft.com/support. And now enjoy this throwback edition of Solved. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for listening and supporting the show as always. As is often the case, the whole crew is with me. That's Amanda, Deon, and Erin. Offer a greeting.
Hey there.
How's it going?
What's up?
I think he's trolling now. Deon's become a troll on the show, within the show.
Oh, no.
No, that's true.
That melted my brain a little bit.
Good thinking on your feet, Erin.
He was going to defend himself, and then was like, nah. Yeah.
No, I wasn't going to defend myself. I'm a troll.
Oh, man, what a kerfuffle. Today we're doing something new because we came across an interesting article that allows for a new bit of examination. The Atlantic took it upon themselves to, as longtime listeners know, we have a love-hate relationship with the Atlantic, and this time we'll put it more toward the love category. They republished a very interesting article that was originally written in 1996. And except for the names of the characters, it is shocking how much of it could have been transported into modern day. And so we have that article to discuss, and then another modern one that is going to end up sounding very similar. So the 1996 article is titled, "Why Americans Hate the Media." And they go through so many subtopics that we couldn't possibly get through them all. So we're just going to focus on the one with the strongest echoes into today, which is dealing not with issues, but instead with only the game of politics. Basically, the what versus the how. And so it says that in 1992, presidential campaign candidates spent more time answering questions from ordinary people. And it gives examples. These are town hall meetings, that sort of thing. So a couple of questions as examples is like, we need stronger laws to punish those who are caught selling guns to our youth. Basically, what can you do about that? Another question, programs designed to keep teenagers away from drugs and gangs often emphasize sports and seem geared mainly to boys. How can such programs be made more attractive to teenage girls? Really concrete. We've got a problem. How are we going to solve it? However, when the media, professional reporters, ask questions, they are almost exclusively about the how, as in, how are you going to try to take away Perot's constituency? How do you answer charges that you have flip-flopped, etc.? And they give this example of Dan Rather, who, Dan came out strongly enough against Bush in those years that it was like, oh yeah, the old-time stalwart, trustworthy journalist. He sees that it's too important to be neutral, and yet back in his heyday, it describes every question he asked was about popularity or political tactics. He asked Phil Gramm to guess whether Newt Gingrich would enter the race. No. And whether Bill Clinton would be renominated by his party. Yes. He asked Bob Dole what kind of mood the president seemed to be in, and whether Dole and Gingrich were, in effect, the new bosses of Washington. When Edward Kennedy began giving his views about the balanced budget amendment, Rather steered him back on course. Quote, "Senator, I'd talk about these things the rest of the afternoon, but let's move quickly to politics. Do you expect Bill Clinton to be the Democratic nominee for re-election in 1996? End quote. So.
Collective sigh.
Oh, yeah, that's brutal. The very short takeaway, and they say this in the article in 1996, I think, is like, it's the structure. Maybe that's the more modern article we'll get to. Like, it is the structure of how the media works that sort of forces people into conducting their journalism this way. I mean, like, not really. They could do better, but they feel some sort of push in that direction, which is hard to wrap your mind around. We'll try, though.
Well, the advent of corporate media had a huge, huge impact on the state of journalism and the rise of the 24-hour news network. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I looked up this article is from February of 1996. Fox News launched October of 1996. So the time where he was writing about this and kind of railing against the state of media was like the ripest time for Murdoch to launch a massive right-wing cable news network. So he was calling out the things that were already starting to change, the TV shows like Crossfire that were just talking heads fighting or talking over each other, and the money that was coming in from shows like that, but also they would tour. And I mean, these things still happen today, but it was changing in a bit of way. I was actually surprised he didn't emphasize the money more, but there were so many good arguments here that that he probably just didn't have room for it. I mean, journalists, the ones who really believe in the role that they play in our democracy, are few and far between these days, and they started dwindling a long time ago.
I think it's pretty obvious that there are great journalists that exist, and they are not pushed forward. They're not put on television. The people that are put on televisions are the ones that are good at the debate and are good at the spectacle. Because to a, I don't know what degree, that's what people watch. People don't necessarily tune in to the long form, detailed, nuanced discussions. People do tune in to the debate. Like, I have been exhausted by MSNBC's coverage of Trump for years and years and years. And not because it's some of it's really good, but a lot of it is the treating him as like just normal. And I think the back and forth, this kind of goes into the next article. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but like the spectacle of things is why we tune into it, but also know as a culture that this is all bullshit, because it is just people turning these important news stories into sports, basically. Like, they call it the horse race politics, because it's just about who's going to win, what tactic are they going to use. Joe Biden basically just shut down the southern border as a political tactic, I think, to maybe win votes, but that's the way it's covered. I don't know the real reason why, but the way it's being covered is this a good political strategy or not?
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to
Mm-hmm.
win votes in November because he did this horrible thing? He's shutting down asylum seekers getting into America. And I think we could talk about that aspect of it more, but that's not the way that it's going to get covered in the news. It's going to get covered as, does this help his chances to win? I tune out, and I think a lot of people do the same.
So I want to be careful when I say this, because as assistant producers on this show, I know that we're very careful about our sources that we use. We use a lot of independent media that's not tied to corporate interest. But I will say, as a whole, if you gravitate in this direction, you start seeing it in all types of journalism. And I have noticed in even a lot of our progressive sources that in discussions about abortion or things like that, it very much is still in that, does this help Biden? Does this hurt Biden? How can it help him?
Yeah.
So very still much in that like strategy. And I'm not saying like when we do shows, we try to exhaust all the different angles of it and like make sure that we're giving the full picture and not hone in on something as micro as, election politics. But I just got done doing an episode, and I'll tell you, election politics was part of it. It was almost impossible to avoid because in that discussion, it just popped up. So I think, my concern is more that this isn't even just in the corporate world. You're seeing it in all types of journalism because that's how trend goes. And I do think to a little part, like I can see the value in talking about elections, but I still think it kind of diminishes, like it doesn't prioritize the harder questions and instead prioritizes speculation. Because at the end of the day, that is what a lot of it is, speculation.
Yeah. So one quick quote attempts to explain motivations of reporters. It says, when there's a chance to use issues as props or raw material for a story about political tactics, most reporters leap at it. It is more fun and easier to write about Bill Clinton's positioning on the Vietnam issue or how Newt Gingrich is handling the need to cut Medicare than it is to look into these issues themselves. And I can also give perspective from producing this show. We produce, when we're at full capacity, 2 full shows and 1 bonus show a week. And that feels like the max we could do, not because there aren't issues worth talking about that we don't have time to get to. Like, there are other things, but like the time it would take to really master another issue so that you could speak about it knowledgeably, the time to do that is not there. And so any journalist or pundit who's expected to produce material daily or be on television daily, they literally don't have the time to master topics to fill the time they are given. And so they have to take shortcuts. They have to simplify it, like maybe bring on experts. That's like the best case scenario. They bring on experts who really do know what they're talking about, but then the journalists end up being constantly out of their depth. And without the mastery of the topics, it's extremely difficult to even know what questions to ask. And so you end up asking, well, how's this going to affect the election? So you've described what action he's taking and why. My next question is, like, what impact is that going to have on the politics? Because they gravitate back to what they know. There was an example in this article that I almost pulled the quote and then didn't, about the Oklahoma City bombing. And Clinton issued an announcement about new anti-terrorism policies. And Cokie Roberts, I think, famous journalist back in the 90s, was asked, what do you think about these new policies? And she's like, I mean, the policies themselves are sort of beside the point. It's really just that Clinton looked good taking a tough stance on the issue for the sake of politics. And it's hard to know whether she truly believed that, or if that's just the amount of information she had and felt like she had to say something knowledgeable so that she sort of justifies being on television at all. And so she has to say something very confidently within her actual wheelhouse, which is politics and the game and how people look and how people are going to feel about it, and just completely ignore the substance because she doesn't understand it. She doesn't know it. Like, no one would expect her to know it. That's not like a failing as a person. Like, well, why aren't you also an expert? Because you can't be an expert on everything, which is why a show like Best of the Left can only come out a couple of times a week, because we take the time. I mean, what is it, like 15, 20 hours of research goes into each hour-long segment, because that's how long it takes to master a new subject. And of course we have lots of background information and institutional memory. So like, it's not like we're coming to new topics as babes in the woods, but then we come to a new topic and we dive deep to present something that we think is worthwhile. I have often thought, what if we turned this into a YouTube show where we were like daily talking heads? But what would the format look like? And I look at the other YouTube shows that are around and what they talk about on a daily basis. I'm not really interested in having conversations about the news of the day.
Yeah.
I'm interested in going deeper.
I want to go back to Deon's point about the asylum order that Biden just issued, because I think this is a perfect example of what this article is talking about. So one of the stories in the Times, I think this headline was different a couple days ago, but the headline is, "In Shift, Biden Order Allowing Temporary Border Closure to Migrants." But the little summary is, "The move shows how drastically immigration politics have shifted in the United States. The American Civil Liberties Union said it planned to challenge the order in court." The first line is about how this is impacting our politics, not how it's impacting people at the border or the citizens of this country. It's about the flippin' politics. And yes, that is part of the story, that a Democratic president is making an order like this. It is not the headline. It is not the main event. The fact that they think it is, this is actually what's killing me. Here we are in a media landscape where eyeballs are the most important thing. But we've been dissatisfied with our journalism for decades, as evidenced by this article, in addition to many others. Yet it only continues to get worse and more surface level. And you really have to dig for the good stuff. So while I'd like to say, oh, market forces are at work, I really don't believe that. I think that ad dollars are at work, and algorithms and platforms that are now serving us news, trying to get the most out of their advertisers is at work. So no one's actually catering to the American public and like what's good for them. There are some, yep, they're out there. But as more and more local newspapers close and we rely on national publications, the news is going to be the horse race. I mean, I feel for some of these journalists, they're cranking out content. That's what they're doing. I wish I could say it was different, it's something else, but that's what it is. They are now content machines for the most part, and their job depends on being able to crank out stuff. And it is totally easier to rely on your instinctual knowledge of the palace intrigue or political football or horse races. Because, yeah, that takes a lot less time and you kind of know already. It's not hard to analyze that. It doesn't take a lot of experience. So we're losing out.
This is playing out right now with the Washington Post, which recently the editor resigned / was fired, and there are going to be cutbacks, and there's an announcement that they're going to use limited amounts of AI to drive stories, which is just code for AI will be writing stories instead of actual journalists doing actual journalism because it's cheaper. It's a profit model. Like the story that we were sold when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post was he can take a loss, and now the Washington Post doesn't really have to make money because it's not going to be a money-making center for them. They can really do journalism, and that's bullshit. They all care about making money, no matter what. They want to make as much money as possible, and it is not profitable to do real long-form, deep investigative journalism. Most of the cable news channels do not have investigative journalists at all on staff. That's not a thing that they do anymore because it costs money. They're trying to make as much money as possible. And there is a direct conflict between doing journalism and making profit. There's a reason why when you go to the grocery store, it's not just all nutritious foods, because if that was the only thing that was in there, they would probably make less money. Junk food sells. I buy junk food. Junk media sells. I consume junk media. If the choice between real journalism and the horse race, most people that are watching, I think, choose the horse race. And it's a financial decision that these companies are making because it is a financial decision because capitalism isn't good at everything. It's not good at journalism. It's not good at healthcare. It has some things that maybe there shouldn't be a profit motive behind. And information about what is going on in our politics, in our world, maybe shouldn't be driven by profit.
So the best example I found in this article of someone trying, like, seemingly desperately to say something substantive, a politician trying to say something substantive, and the journalists, like, not letting that message get through, was about then Senator Bill Bradley resigning. And he doesn't use the word neoliberalism. It doesn't appear in this article. Wouldn't have been the phrase that anyone would have used at that time. Possibly globalization would have been the word of the era. But this article describes, after announcing his resignation, in interviews and at the news conference he conducted afterward, Bradley did his best to talk about the deep problems of public life and economic adjustment that had left him frustrated with the political process. Each of the parties had locked itself into rigid positions that kept it from dealing with the realistic concerns of ordinary people, he said. American corporations were doing what they had to do for survival in international competition. They were downsizing and making themselves radically more efficient and productive. But the result was to leave, quote, decent, hardworking Americans more vulnerable to layoffs and the loss of their careers, medical coverage, side note, because America's terrible at medical coverage, pension rights, and social standing, because we're also bad at community. So people get their social standing from their jobs. So they were at risk more than they had been in decades. Continuing, it says, somehow, Bradley said, we had to move past the focus on short-term political maneuvering and determine how to deal with the forces that were leaving Americans frustrated and insecure. I would hold those two words in your mind. Probably not difficult because they get talked about a hell of a lot these days. It says, that at least was what Bill Bradley said. What turned up in the press was almost exclusively speculation about what the move meant for this year's presidential race and the party lineup on Capitol Hill. Might Bradley challenge Bill Clinton in the Democratic primaries? If not, was he preparing for an independent run? Wasn't this a slap in the face for Bill Clinton and the party he purported to lead? In the aftermath of Bradley's announcement, prominent TV and newspaper reporters competed to come up with the shrewdest analysis of the political impacts of the move. None of the country's major papers or networks used Bradley's announcement as a news peg for an analysis of the real issues he'd raised. End quote. So can you even imagine what the world might look like now if we started having a critical discussion about globalism and what came to be known as neoliberal economics in 1996? That conversation didn't start in earnest until the last 5 years.
Yeah. Well, during Obama, maybe end of Obama.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, like, we know news junkies who didn't know the word neoliberalism like 5 years ago. They just like didn't know the word, the concept, the criticism, just didn't know it.
Oh, it was during TPP. Sorry, I just remembered.
Maybe.
That was
Yeah.
when I started to really hear it. Yeah.
Trans-Pacific Partnership. So yeah, he tried, he was just like a politician who cared about real issues. The media, they're just not built for it. I really want to be cautious because like this is where people take the conspiratorial fork in the road and they start saying things like they don't want you to know. That's bullshit. Individual journalists are not making personal decisions based on conspiratorial nonsense about hiding facts from people. It's systemic. The media and what gets described in these articles as incremental daily journalism is not built to absorb deep concepts. Therefore, deep concepts are not presented because they cannot present concepts that they themselves are not equipped to describe and explain. So they just keep it light. And Bill Bradley tried to warn us about neoliberalism and how it leads to frustrated and insecure Americans, which, like, I don't know, for instance, might lead people into desperate imaginings of, well, if the political system isn't going to fix the economic system to make me feel more secure, maybe someone just needs to come in and drain the swamp and take control themselves. And like, I don't know if that'll work out perfectly, but it's sure as hell going to be better than this. They imagine to themselves as they march us towards fascism.
What Bill Bradley said cannot be put on a poster. It cannot be a campaign ad. Hope and change can. Make America great again can. So keep it light. And then this guy who cared about these issues deeply, profoundly, he left because it was too much. It wasn't working. So who takes his place? Someone who is probably better trained at media and the way that media works right now, and then it on and on and on. And now where are we at? How many Bill Bradleys are in the Senate, and how many hope and change / make America great again types are in the Senate? There are several that are very good. It's just the same thing with journalism. There are many good journalists. There are many people who get into politics for the right reasons, but the system filters them out because that's not what we're about here. This is America. Profit. That's what it's about.
Step 3, profit. Again, this is from 1996. The news media has a generally positive view of itself in the watchdog role, wrote the authors of an exhaustive survey of public attitudes and attitudes of journalists themselves towards the press. The survey was conducted by the Times Mirror Center for the People and Press and was released last May. of 1996. But the outside world strongly faults the news media for its negativism. The public goes so far as to say that the press gets in the way of society solving its problems, according to the survey. 2 out of 3 members of the public had nothing or nothing good to say about the media. And again, that was a long time ago. And those sentiments are so strong now. While I agree, and Deon was talking about, like, there are eyeballs that are looking for this entertainment, infotainment news, wouldn't even put info in front of that anymore. It's just entertainment news. I do think people wish that they could be more informed. I do. I don't think people would say it if asked the direct question, how do you feel about the news media? But I think that it would come up in a conversation about our social discourse and how we make our political decisions. I think people are craving something that feels substantive and like has an impact or talks about the impact on their actual lives. And we've been saying it over and over again for so long, and things just get worse and worse and worse. And we're becoming a less informed society. Our social structures are breaking down in part because of that. And because now there's a mix of really hyper partisan bad actors in the mix. I mean, we are at a moment where, and they said this in the article, in the long run, this is a problem for democracy. Well, we're in the long run, right? We're seeing the writing on the wall now about what it's been like to live in a country with the pillars of democracy crumbling before our eyes. And it could get worse. Don't get me wrong. It could get a whole lot worse. But we're seeing it. We're living it.
I think because we build upon everything and make those connections, the part that worries me is one of the episodes that we just put out a couple weeks ago talked about voters and how most Americans don't know about politics. They're not heavily informed. They're not watching, news every single day. So I think at the intersection of that and knowing that whatever exposure they do get most likely won't be very informative, won't be issue driven, it's very concerning because, my hope is even if we're low information, inevitably all of us get exposed to a news story or the news happens to be on when we go somewhere. So there's some kind of point where you come into contact. And I would hope that in that you could walk away knowing something. But unfortunately, under this guise, you very well will know if Trump or Biden is leading in polls months away from the actual election when anything could happen and might happen. And I think another problem with this is like a lot of people view media as being dishonest or kind of telling tales that aim at certain demographics. And, we diagnose it as profit driven. Like, obviously, you're going to go where the money is. You're going to tell the stories that get you the viewership. But I think because everyone gets under this like mistrust of media, there's also like a comparison between, Fox News and MSNBC are on the same level, or false equivalences that are being made as all media is bad, all media misconstrues things or tells a particular part of the story. And I think that also is worrisome because we know that our youth and things like that aren't being trained on what trusted sources are or how to kind of navigate that realm. So we just have a bunch of people who are like, no, they're the same. You have your story, I have my story, but they equate to the same thing.
So moving from 1996 to 2024, this article from The Intercept, the media still doesn't grasp the danger of Trump, will have unsettling echoes. As the previous article talked about, it's a lot easier to talk about the politics than the substance. And when applied to Trump, it becomes horrifying. It says, with their obsession with horse race coverage, political reporters tend to judge what Trump says or does by whether his words and actions will help him politically. By doing so, the press is saying that Trump's racism, corruption, criminality, and insane abuses of power matter only so far as his electability. And even in an article that I mostly agree with the analysis, the framing is just a tiny bit not exactly how I would like for it to be said. They describe political reporters obsession with horse race coverage. But again, okay, so there's the chicken and egg situation too. Maybe people who genuinely have an obsession with horse race coverage get hired to do those jobs because they are well fit for that job. On the other hand, someone who is not obsessed with horse race coverage would still end up finding themselves doing that sort of coverage because of the pressures of daily dispatches. So who knows whether the individual people have this wrong-headed obsession or if it is a structurally imposed directive that they have that obsession, or both. But these are the sort of complications that generally lead back to, well, it's structural. Because if we had a different structure, then people who are wrong-headedly obsessed with horse race coverage instead of substance wouldn't get hired. They wouldn't get hired in a different system. So they wouldn't be a good fit for it. This article goes on to make the verboten comparison and says, when Hitler first burst into German political life, the American press sought to downplay his importance by treating him as a joke. The Smithsonian notes how Newsweek called him a nonsensical screecher of wild words and that his appearance suggested Charlie Chaplin. Over time, American journalists' view of Hitler began to shift, but mostly just to show greater respect for his skills as a charismatic public speaker and a successful demagogue. Ultimately, through more than a decade in German politics before he came to power, Hitler was normalized by American reporters. The press became numb to the outrageous things he said and wrote and did. He kept saying the same things for years. He laid out many of his plans and intentions in Mein Kampf in 1925, 8 years before he came to power. By the time of the crucial 1932 German elections and Hitler's subsequent rise to power in 1933, his rabid anti-Semitism and his lust for power were treated as old news. Which, you know, as we are like in the middle of election season right now, I mean, the driving point of this article and what could be said very easily by anyone about today's media is like, they are not treating this as the emergency that it so obviously is. And it's this, you know, snake eating its own tail sort of reasoning where they're like, well, you know, like everyone knows it's an emergency, so we don't have to say it. And if we said it, then we wouldn't be neutral, so we can't say it. In reality, a lot of people don't know it because the media is not saying it. And the media says they can't say it because then people would know it. And then that would be like the media being state news supporting Biden. Okay, so then we just can't tell the truth anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a false idea that like all facts are neutral, depending on who you are. If you report like that someone killed 10 people, like that is what happened, but that's not a neutral statement. That's something that automatically invokes some kind of emotion, and to expect, like, I don't know when the media has just been expected to be completely removed from like emotion or like just people experiencing the same world they happen to be reporting on. I know over at Citations Needed, the hosts have covered extensively this need to present both sides, present them as if they're both neutral and that one side isn't worse than the other, when you can put out the facts and it still weighs in one direction. The idea of neutrality, and I'm sorry if I'm not explaining that well, is just kind of obscure because not everything is neutral.
Yeah.
There are things that happen to be better than others. There's things that happen to be worse than others. I don't need a media that's neutral, but I do need media that reports facts out, but that doesn't mean that there's also not things to connect that or pieces that they can provide to the audience without it seeming completely biased. Because to me, the bias sinks in more when you're trying to use facts and you have the agenda of, you know, misleading, I guess. Whereas if you just happen to be like, hey, this is really fucking awful, let me tell you about it, and here's the facts of why it's awful, it's pretty straightforward. I think that's a good place to not be neutral.
Trump doesn't fit into the horse race politics model. He just doesn't. Like, you can't say this horse is running this way. And meanwhile, that horse has a guy on it with a gun in the middle of the field shooting people in the stands. That's not a race anymore. So you can't talk about them the same way. So you have to find a way to make it more normal. And whether it's intentional or whether it's not, whether it's just the way the system works, who knows? But like the article writer, he said he often wondered how the German press and like the American press let Hitler become normal. And now he thinks he understands. I've been thinking that for a while. How on earth did that ranting lunatic become the leader of a country? And then we're watching it over and over and over again. A friend of mine, his mom is a Trump supporter. He's not a Trump supporter at all. She's a Trump supporter. And I guess they had an argument after the trial verdict came out. And, I didn't get to talk to her, but I asked him, like, do you think your mom would be okay if you did to your wife, not the fraud part, but just the reason of the fraud? You cheated on your wife with, we'll just say, a prostitute while your wife was at home with your newborn children. And he said, of course my mom would be okay with that. And of course she wouldn't. I know her. She's a really nice lady. She's a member of a church. She's a sweet lady. She cares about people. But for some reason, his awful behavior is just background noise. Like that alone should be enough to disqualify him. But in the context of all of the stuff that is just now background noise, that's not even like a minor issue that he cheated on his wife with a porn star and paid hush money to cover it up. That's not even a story. That's not the story. And it should be the story.
This is where the impact of the mirror world comes in, and the most succinct response to the accusation, like continuing on with the trial, and now conviction and further trials, right, is like their first and most prominent accusation is that this is political. And the most accurate and most succinct response is, no, actually, the other side is politicizing this. These trials are going through the very normal, non-political process. And the response is to accuse these, prosecutors and grand juries and now like regular jurors who look at the evidence and are just like, yep, guilty. What am I going to do? And to say that all of that is political, therefore we need to arbitrarily prosecute high-ranking Democrats. And what is so obvious is like, no, that's you. You're the one politicizing it. But we live in the mirror world, or some people do. And so they don't see it that way. They think that that's a great tit for tat. My favorite, like I wish I had the quote in front of me, but I think I can do it justice. John Yoo crawled back out from the rock he's been hanging out under since the Bush administration, when he famously wrote the memo making the case for why Americans should be able to torture prisoners, and said that in response to Trump's conviction, Republicans need to do in kind to Democrats what has just happened to them, and encouraged people to remember the age-old saying that you should do unto others as they have done unto you, which is such a brilliant misquoting of the Bible, of such a famous phrase that someone like me and a lot of other people who've never read the Bible know that that is not how that phrase goes. Literally the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, and subvert that into an eye for an eye is the best policy, says John Yoo. Yeah, they're maniacs. I feel like I was headed towards a better point than calling them maniacs, but I mean, that's where I ended up.
The other common excuse I've heard from people in my loose circle that happen to support Trump is, well, everyone does that. Everyone has illegal doings. And my response, prosecute them then. Like, I'm not defending it. If like someone really has done the wrong thing, why would I protect them because of their political affiliate? But the fact that in their brains, that is the ultimate gotcha kind of retort is Like, okay, well, we'll investigate Biden. It's
Well,
okay. I mean, I don't think that you should just be able to investigate without any kind of level of evidence towards whatever you're accusing them of, right? I don't think open investigation should just be a thing. But if you're really saying you have evidence of a crime, then investigate Biden.
and they did, and they couldn't find anything.
Yes. Which I believe, in one of these conversations, that was my retort, where like none of that has gone through. You have to have some level. But of course, then it's the questioning of the courts. And I think you kind of get into a place where you're not arguing in any kind of fact. So it just devolves very quickly. But, part of that is just that we've moved into a direction where we're rooting for teams, and it's my team versus your team, and I'm always going to support my team no matter what that looks like. And I think no matter if there's a Republican judge, doesn't matter, for some reason they're no longer on the team. Like there's always going to be the caveat to that.
The thing that always gets me is that while it may be that other people who are getting away with the same crimes that Trump is being prosecuted for, he did them. And it's very clear and it's very obvious. What I think the media, bringing it back to that, has actually done a terrible job of is explaining what he did and why it was illegal. That's been driving me up a wall. Yeah, he paid hush money to a porn star. That's not actually what the crime is. You need to explain to people what the fraud means. It's fraud. You got to give them more. Not everybody is in on the legal jargon, and most people probably don't even know how the law works. So, I mean, look, they covered this trial like they covered any other celebrity trial, right? It was this daily, just like breathless coverage. And they weren't even able to show any footage, which made everyone, I'm sure, just like lose their minds, which meant more talking heads on TV constantly, more legal analysts just speculating and throwing shit around and just working themselves up into a lather about what might happen, right? Because this is the news environment we have. Was that helpful to anyone? Any voter at all? No. Is it newsworthy? Yes. Was any of the coverage helpful? No. And so that's the line. And I guarantee even some of the people who are just like saying he was prosecuted for political reasons, if they were told, well, he did break the law and here's how, I'm not saying they'd flip, but I think that it would do something. That's the most I'm willing to speculate on. Like, I think it would do something. I think it would be like, oh, well, okay. I don't like it, but yeah, I guess he did break the law, right? And as was said in some good coverage of the trial, that type of fraud has been prosecuted hundreds and hundreds of times in New York. It's not like everybody gets away scot-free and Trump was the only one. There's plenty of other people who've been prosecuted for it and served time for it, etc. So come on now.
On the journalism point, even if the media outlets that were interested in doing great journalism and could do great journalism covered it exactly the way that we would want it to be covered, we're not in 1996. And there is an entire universe of Republican propaganda outlets that would cover it the exact opposite way and would probably hurt dissemination of real information. There's just a whole nother level of misinformation mixed in with journalism right now that regular media organizations, they're just not equipped to deal with. Because if you say, here is exactly what Trump did, here's what he's accused of, here's what the prosecution said, Trump can go on like he did Fox News and say, and I had perfect records and not be pushed back at all. And I never said lock Hillary up. That was something I never said, and that not be pushed back on at all. There wasn't a parallel to that in 1996. We are so much further along this terrible media ecosystem. Like you said, we're in the long game. We're seeing what the long game from 96 would look like.
This article sort of wraps up its point saying, just like Hitler before him, Trump is benefiting from the fact that journalism is an incremental daily business. Every day, reporters have to find something new to write or broadcast. Trump keeps saying dangerous and crazy things, but that's not new. He said it all before. His impeachments and the January 6th insurrection happened years ago. True, he has been indicted 4 times and now faces up to 4 criminal trials, but that's already been reported. What's new today? And so my takeaway from this is that to save democracy, people should listen to podcasts that produce between 1 and 2 episodes a week and not more, because that's the real sweet spot. That's where you're going to get the good stuff. More than that, that's a diet of cotton candy. That's the fluff. Substance comes from people who do the research. Just throwing that out there. To wrap today, we have one more topic that we have to go through sort of quickly, but I think it's a happy one because we don't have to be as upset about misinformation as we thought we did. The New Yorker magazine writes, "Don't believe what they're telling you about misinformation." And they basically break down research about different kinds of belief, things that we think to be true versus things that we believe to be true. Things like, I believe that chairs exist. Like an anthropologist went to Ethiopia and members of a tribe would describe their belief that leopards are Christian and also observe the fast on the same days that the Ethiopian Christian church does. However, those people might have believed that leopards were Christian, but they weren't so silly as to not guard their flocks on fasting days, right? So there's like the thing you think, which is leopards are dangerous and chairs exist, and the thing you believe, which is pretty sure leopards are Christian. But just in case, I'm going to protect my flock. And so by breaking this down, you get this sense of symbolic beliefs versus factual beliefs. And depending on how researchers ask people about the beliefs they have, they will literally give different answers. Like if they're incentivized with money based on accuracy, they will get questions wrong less. Because on some level, people know that some of the stuff they believe is probably bullshit. And like they're comfortable believing it, but they're not necessarily to the point of thinking it to be true. Did anyone else find this comforting?
I did when they talked about how it manifests. Because, of course, the concern is always that people that believe really bonkers stuff will do something really awful in the real world. And based on this research, that seems somewhat less likely, although it doesn't take many people to cause horrific tragedy. But one of the examples they use is, of course, Pizzagate, famous point in time where we all realized, oh my God, we are surrounded by people who believe in alternate realities and we're all in danger. But they say what's really striking is how anomalous that act was. The guy that went to the pizza place in DC and tried to take action. The pizzeria received menacing phone calls, even death threats, but the most common response from believers, aside from liking posts, seems to have been leaving negative Yelp reviews. I love that they call the left keyboard warriors. There they are, going going for the Yelp reviews. And I don't mean to dismiss how serious that was that guy showed up, but that was somewhat comforting to me.
Yeah, because if millions of people genuinely believed that there was a pedophile ring keeping kidnapped children in the basement of a pizza place, more than one person should have thought we need to take action.
Mm-hmm.
But turns out like pretty much just the one dude actually went and did it. And so, yeah, that it is quite anomalous.
The flip side of that is like, if you look back at slavery based on absolute misinformation, lies, deceit, if you actually believe that it is an evil institution that is destroying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, then maybe John Brown's actions make total sense, right? You should go do that. And
Mm-hmm.
we have a bunch of beliefs that are just symbolic. Our society, I think, is built on a lot of them. And that's what is less comforting to me, is that when people are asked these questions, they can answer in a whole different way. A lot of people's whole reality is just symbolic belief. It's not based on anything. So when you start to examine it, and then you're stuck in this world where, well, what do I believe what do I believe at all? What is anything I believe based on reality? Where do you go with the fallout from that? Because I think we're trying to do that right now with a lot of issues, like American history is pretty bullshit. The way a lot of things function is just symbols, and America is big on symbols. When those symbols don't hold value anymore, what is it replaced with? It's a new symbol that makes you feel comfortable. And if that new symbol is that Mexicans are the source of all your problems, maybe you close the border. I wasn't really comforted by this, other than you've been misinformed about misinformation, which totally fits. We've we live in misinformation world.
The mention that money changes how people react also, well, I don't know if it was comforting. It was just sort of validating, actually. I think that people's brains break, as we've talked about before, when money enters the equation. So they say, put money on the table and people suddenly see the light. In an influential paper published in 2015, team led by the political scientist John Bullock found sizable differences in how Democrats and Republicans thought about politicized topics, like the number of casualties in the Iraq War. Paying respondents to be accurate, which included rewarding don't know responses over wrong ones, cut the difference by 80%. A series of experiments published in 2023 by van der Linden and 3 colleagues replicated the well-established finding that conservatives deem false headlines to be true more often than liberals, but found that the difference drops by half when people are compensated for accuracy. I mean, again, more validating, not super surprising, but super interesting.
So that's how we should pay journalists, based on accuracy. Pundits on television should have their pay connected to their accuracy.
And there are a lot of pundits that would just owe money.
Right. Exactly. Well, so the part that I found most validating was when this article about misinformation came back around and was like, God damn it, is literally everything about the need to build community? So that same researcher, van der Linden, tells us that people are more often drawn to conspiracy theories when they feel uncertain and powerless. Thanks, Bill Bradley, for giving us that warning 20 years ago, and regard themselves as marginalized victims. So it is, in one sense, the media's fault that we have all this conspiratorial belief, but not because they don't tell us enough facts, but because they didn't talk enough about the problems of neoliberalism 20 years ago and in the intervening time to help us avoid the inevitable ends that we are currently experiencing, which cause people to feel uncertain and powerless. Also, conspiratorial rumors flourish among people who experience, quote, a lack of interpersonal trust and, quote, a sense of alienation. So once again, turns out we just need to, have an economic system that supports people in addition to community building that supports people in their daily lives so that they don't feel drawn to the artificial communities of lunatics who believe the same thing that you believe. Did we solve that?
Honestly, I could go on about this for too long. I'm trying to pull myself back because I know we're running short on time. I thought there were so many little nuggets in here, including the research on politics. They mention that lack of interpersonal trust and sense of alienation. And they talk about more than Russian bots or click-hungry algorithms. A crisis of trust and legitimacy seems to lie behind the proliferation of paranoid falsehoods. This is not surprising, but it's like,
is it a polycrisis?
It is a polycrisis. It is a polycrisis.
All right, well, good enough. If you have thoughts on solving this polycrisis, send us a message or leave a voicemail at 202-999-3991 or send me an email to j@bestoftheleft.com. Thanks for listening. Go home, actively engage, and build a community.